we've heard a lot about sort of these fire sales policies. We have 12 years or 11 years now left to do something on climate, and we're in a sort of a frenzy to implement some policies, do something, or we should have started 30 years ago. These are the typical themes. And I want to share some of the framework that helped me think about this kind of strategic policies thing, and which argues against that, because the notion is that the earlier you start, the better, but that's not always the best course of action. And so my analogy comes from space exploration of all things. And so here's a scenario for you. So let's suppose we found another planet similar to Earth where probably human life can be sustained. And we want to explore that, but it's quite a distance to reach that planet. And we want to get a explorer crew there to find out, what are the conditions? Can we really send people there and colonize this planet? And so let's say our Starship Columbus 1 should be started soon, and we are considering, is this really a good investment? Will this do the job? And we have the technology. We can reach probably 1% of light speed, and we would need 100 years to bring our crew there. So we can accelerate the spaceship to 1% of light speed, and then it will travel for about 100 years and then reach Earth 2. And, this is a long-term strategic project similar to, influencing climate in the ways proposed today. But now there's a problem, because this is a great expense. We need to invest a lot of money in this. And so is this the right time to do this? Is this the right level of technology we have? That's a big question. So we could end up, or we could estimate that 50 years down the road, so when Columbus 1 is halfway to the other planet, we have developed technology that can reach 3 times the original speed of Columbus 1. And Columbus 2, the next mission, would then, 50 years down the road, actually reach the planet first if it started 50 years after Columbus 1. So, and it would have all kinds of advantages. At a minimum, we would get the job done at lower cost, but we would probably also have, shorter travel time, which means the crew has a higher probability of actually surviving and doing the job. And we have better technologies in all kinds of realms. So we have a greater chance at success, and it makes no sense in this scenario to actually start Columbus 1 if we have a high degree of certainty that Columbus 2 will actually have that higher speed technology. So the way this works is that Columbus 2 would then have a better propulsion system to accelerate to 3% of light speed, and even if it started only 50 years later, would actually arrive first. Right? So, and this analogy translated into a climate policy would be something like, what do we really need to replace fossil fuels if CO2 emission reductions is really the only way out of this, right? Because that's what's proposed. I don't believe in it, but let's think about this for a moment. So we would have to have, by the end of this century or late in this century, maybe 50 years down the road, maybe 70 years down the road, we would need some real replacement technology that could actually reduce CO2 emissions to zero. So fossil fuel use and other technologies to zero. And we've seen what happened to early movers like Germany. There's a lot of expense early on and not a lot of success. We are really struggling to reach even weak climate goals, as we've discussed before in this episode. But we are sort of failing. And because we're insisting on, using solar winds and battery cars and so on and so forth, and we insist on installing them early on. We cannot wait. We only have 10 years left and so on. But that's not really the problem. The problem is, how do we achieve this reduction goal late century? How do we get to zero after 2050? Something like that. And so the act early approach isn't actually always the right strategy. Very often, it makes a lot of sense to wait, develop your technology, improve your technology, and then make sure that you're doing the right moves. So we don't know yet. Maybe it's all in nuclear technology that can do the job. Maybe it's geoengineering that can do the job. Maybe adaptation is really the only option, right? And so waiting has a lot of benefit, and not only in the economic sense, but also in getting the job actually done. Like it's often much better to wait a bit and improve your starting position, and then find out, what is actually doing the job. And what we are doing right now, what our governments are doing right now, is putting all our eggs in the failure basket. They are insisting on solar and wind and battery cars and so on, and implementing them early when they are not very good and cannot even replace fossil fuels. And so this is an absolutely wrong approach. It's almost as if someone wants this spaceship in this analogy to fail. They don't want the crew to arrive. They insist on using bad technology instead of taking a much safer road to the actual goal. So even if you agree with the climate catastrophe scenario, like late 21st century and beyond, even then you would have to consider, do we actually have the level of technology to make it happen? And, when can we expect to be in a starting position where we can actually act on this? And I think it's quite revealing that policymakers and advocates are always insisting on the sort of worst technologies available, and always insisting on keeping on doing the same failures again and again. And if they were serious about, like Greta Thunberg talking about mass extinction events and so on, we would really have to be serious about getting the job done with the right technology. And this is not the time to decide that. 2019 is not the correct starting point in, pushing for one certain technology to do the job, like solar, wind, and batteries, and so on, and exclude something like nuclear or geoengineering, and so on. And this analogy really helped me thinking about this kind of strategic goal. Like, is this a real thing when someone has this fire sale approach? So the deal ends this evening, so you better don't go home to your family to discuss your options, right? It's just they want to push through a certain policy no matter what. And so the climate advocate Greta Thunberg is actually a good symbol for that, because she doesn't comprehend what the policy, she doesn't even propose a real policy, and she doesn't comprehend what this entails. But she wants us to act yesterday. And this is the opposite of a prudent approach, in my view.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that's why I think I agree with everything you said. I really like that analogy. And I mean, I think a theme that's come through in this episode is just you can't make any sense of what the catastrophists in the green movement more broadly, you can't make any sense of what their demands are and what they're doing if you're seeing it through the lens of an attempt to solve a real problem. Like, this is, what it would look like to solve a real problem is like what you're saying, or, I mean, we've talked about Bill Gates and how he thinks about these problems. The only way you can understand it is that this is a power grab by people who hate capitalism and industry and freedom. And if that's what you're doing, then frenzied is good. Like, you want action now, and you want massive action now. During the financial crisis, I forget who it was. It might have been, was it Cass Sunstein? No, not Cass Sunstein. Who became the mayor of Chicago? Rahm Emanuel. Don't let a crisis go to waste. And that's, in a crisis, you can act really quickly. You can take over a lot of power. And one of the things that happens when you have a frenzied grab for power is, by the time any person can rationally understand and respond to one of those things, there's 10 more in progress. And so it becomes very dispiriting, and people trying to fight for freedom can just give up in exhaustion and not know where to go and what to do. And I think you're already seeing that in the area of energy. I mean, I've talked to a lot of, hydrocarbon companies, and they feel like, all right, we take, what happened in Colorado. It's like, oh man, we invested millions and millions and millions, and we defeat Proposition 112, which is going to be this catastrophic restriction on fracking. And then, okay, now we have a year or two to regroup until the next round of fighting. And then instantly the, new Colorado government just shoves through a bunch of killer things. And you get exhausted, and you can't mount a real defense. And that's why it's so crucial to draw the line in the sand early, that you have to resist when it's easy to resist before you have an opposition that has the capability to act in a frenzied way. And, we didn't do that with climate. And particularly if you think about what the hydrocarbon industry did, mostly just kept its head down and mouth shut. And and not that it's totally on them. I mean, I think that, there is not a lot of intellectual opposition, or certainly not sufficient when it could have been most impactful. And so then, that itself, this observation can be pessimistic and dispiriting. But I mean, my view is that what we're seeing right now is very likely to see the green movement overstep. And what often happens is you get these movements where the group will become very empowered and will push and push and push, and then they go too far, and then they kind of step back for a while, kind of disappear for a while, they quiet down for a while, and then they come back again later. And so it does not solve the problem, but it buys you time to mount a really powerful, confident defense. I don't think we can rely on that. I think you have to, we talked about how this upcoming election is going to be really important to stand up and have a very hardline response to the people who want to eliminate fossil fuels. But I think, that it will be very helpful if there's a lull and a chance to have a more kind of concerted, longer term effort.